Hello class, welcome back. In this lecture video, I'm going to continue talk about genre conventions and also rhetorical situations. I'm also going to give you a few examples of following last week's lecture. In last week's lecture, we basically talk about what is rhetorical situation, right? Rhetorical situation is a situation that requires you to do some kind of communications following a kind of purpose. And as this situation occurs again and again and again, smart people, develop a kind of formulated way of dealing with this kind of situation. That is when the genre kind of like rise up, right? And genres also follow certain kind of conventions because people find out that this is the most effective way of communicating your ideas, and also this is the most successful way for you to um, achieve your purpose. So for the genre conventions and for the rhetorical situations, we are going to analyze that for writing project 2, right? So the major task for you is to find out what kind of rhetorical strategies the author is using, and then analyze whether it's successful or not, right? So for in last week's lecture, we have talked about ethos, logos, and pathos. Those are three major rhetorical appeals, right? And we have used examples, and all of you have analyzed it in the ENC 1101 class, right? It's analyze a speech, right? Whether it's appeal to people's emotions or to use data to provide good logos, and also like citing only reliable and credible sources is a good practice of ethos, right? But I think most of you might have less experience of analyzing non-text based artifacts. And for example, if you're looking at a particular photo, then how to analyze ethos, logos, and pathos in a photo or in a painting and in a movie clip, for example. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about visual logos, ethos, and pathos, and how they manifest differently than non-text based artifacts. I think that's the interesting part about project 2, right? And that is also the challenging part, is for you to compare the text-based artifacts, which we analyze all the time in the high school AP classes, right, versus non-text-based artifact. If you are not an art history major, that a lot of times we do not have the language or the structure of analyzing a non-text-based artifact. So a lot of times we go to a gallery looking at a painting, we're at a loss of what to say. It's like, oh, interesting painting, but what else can we analyze? How can we discern rhetorical strategies, ethos, logos, and pathos in visual artifacts? All right. So let's look at logos, ethos, and pathos. As I have already mentioned in previous lecture videos, logos is about facts, data, statistics. It's good reasoning. It is persuading your audience through good logic, right? Hence, it's called logos, right? And ethos is to build yourself as a credible author, somebody that is trustworthy, has good authority over the topic you are going to talk about, and good ethos would make your audience, make your readers easily trust you, right? And pathos is to appeal to people's feelings, because we are all emotional creatures. So, using all kinds of different rhetorical strategies to arouse different kind of feelings to help you achieve your rhetorical goal. All right, now we are going to talk about ethos, logos, and pathos in visual artifacts. So here, this is a really good example of bad ethos, logos, and pathos in this particular web page design, right? So if you look at this web page, first impression is that, oh my God, that's the web, like the IT person is like, is this person professional? Does this person know the design rules? Like how messy this looks, this page look like, and where should I start? What things should I click? What is the logical, like chain in this particular web page, and also is this a credible website? A credible website should look more professional, right? There should be more visual consistency, right? So this is like bad logos, ethos, and pathos in a website design. All right, so like bad designs really damage your ethos, right? So if there is a lack of ethos, first is a lack of site structure and alignment. For example, what is a structure? Is there any alignment? Where do I start? What is each part about? So bad ethos in a visual artifacts means there are no clear structure and there are no visible alignment. Another bad kind of ethos in a kind of like visual artifact is a kind of like bad typography, right? So we use different typographies to suggest different structures, the hierarchies, right? So what is the the foremost important things we want our audience to look at? What is the secondary important things we want them to follow up? But here, look at this. This is a mix of different kind of typographies of different sizes, and we do not know why certain things are emphasized and where should our eyes start, right? So this is another type of bad ethos that would really jeopardize your ethos if you build a website or you make a poster that looks like this. And the third thing is no navigational hierarchy. So in the later half of today's lecture, I'm going to talk about how to build a nice visual hierarchy, right? So here we can see like we do not know what is each part about and where do we start from, what are each part about. This is just random informations, random like typography or colors or size of text put together, and the visuals, the photos, the paintings are also like used in a very messy way. So this is another example of showing you what bad ethos look like. All right, so after talking about ethos, we can talk about pathos. So pathos and colors, they actually create different kind of effect. So three basic elements for visual pathos would be hue, saturation, and brightness. For example, hues means like different kind of colors, right? So for example, cold colors like blue and green, they create a different kind of atmosphere than warm colors, for example, orange or yellow, right? So if you want your website or the artifacts to look more welcoming, a lot of times designers have to use more warm colors. But if a designer want to displays to be like arouse or appeal to people's logical thinking, critical thinking, then sometimes they use cold colors, like cold hues to, like for example, green and blue to create a kind of situation that the audience might be more willing to use their thinking. And saturations, different kind of saturations, grayness and hues would also create different kind of like atmosphere and arouse different kind of emotions. And brightness, for very bright colors like red or like green or blue, they can be very appealing, but they also hurt your eyes. Well, like the less brightness would also create a kind of like more warmer and calmer kind of atmosphere, other than this kind of like like very enthusiastic. For example, if you are designing a nightclub, right, the kind of hues, the kind of color, the kind of brightness of the lighting all would affect the mood of your audience. And pathos and typography is that different kind of typography also creates different kind of like feelings. So for example, the professional kind of typography, Times New Roman, why we ask students to all submit papers using Times New Romans or Arials, or commonly used typography in professional settings is that they are clearer, they look professional, they give a kind of professional feeling, right? But other typographies, for example, if we look at different kind of typographies, for example, the kind of like Gothic typography, they are very artistic. They can be used in different settings. For example, if you want your visual artifacts, for example, your website to be very artistic, then you can use other type of typography that is like less formal and professional, like the Arial or Times New Roman, right? And the logos of visual artifacts is more focused on creating a kind of like visual hierarchy, choosing how many elements to include. For example, if you are designing a poster for a club for FSU, how many elements? You cannot include all the elements, all the contents about what this club is, who are the club members, what is the purpose, and like who should apply to be a member. Like there are so many information you want to include, and as a kind of good designer, you have to choose how many elements to include in the poster, right? And the second most important thing is that logos is logic, right? So for text-based artifacts, logos can be like reasoning, like a logical chain reasoning, cause and effect, like all kinds of different kind of logic, starting from a hypothesis, using different data, results of different experiments, whether it's like qualitative analysis or quantitative studies. Then we use all kinds of data and results to back up the hypothesis and prove that your hypothesis is right or wrong. So for the visual artifacts, logos manifest in kind of like visual logic, right? So what is the logic of putting all those visual elements, the words, the text, all those color patterns into the website or the poster you are designing? What is the most important visual elements? Where should we start? And then what is the second most important of the visual elements in that particular screen, right? So that is called creating a visual hierarchy. All right. So, and the third thing is how to create a kind of visual unity through repetitions. The logic of our brain is that, like repeated patterns might mean that they belong to the same kind of hierarchy. If the size is the same, maybe they all belong to the same category, and the same patterns indicate to us that maybe they serve the similar functions. So visual unity could be seen as a lot of repeated visual elements in visual artifacts. So let's start with the first one, is how many elements to include. So the logos first is using your logical thinking and think about, so we cannot put all those tests, all those informations on one particular poster, right? Let's just use poster as an example. So, and there is a fun fact showing that our working memory capacity is around 10 to 15 seconds, which means that we can only remember only 3 to 4 items at one glance. So if one person look at your poster, you cannot expect your audience to remember all the details, right? If you include 12 different things, they're all important, great stuff to put on the poster, but because our working memory is limited, they can only remember 3 or 4 items in one day. So let's look at 2 examples of the posters, right? We can see like this designer is using very good logos. They are not including all the details of this particular show, of this particular movie, right? And we can also see the similarity in the design. So first, what does our eyes start from? We can see that this is a female face, and we cannot see the eyes or the other parts of the female body. And our eyes nonetheless focus on the red lip and the drop of blood and like the tongue, right? So the mouth is the foremost important visual elements. It is highlighted in a way that that is the first thing that attract our attention. And then we can see, like, following the the most striking visual elements, we have the most important stuff, right? The creators of Juno, right? So if you're a fan of Juno, you might want to see this movie as well. And then Megan Fox. Megan Fox has a very large fan base, so the designer chose to include her name in the movie. And then, of course, movie's name, right? Jennifer's Body, coming soon in theater, right? And who is the directors? We don't know. It's just summarized as the creators of Juno. And when is this movie created? Who are the other stars in the movie? What is this movie about? Is it about revenge? Is it about, like, is it a detective movie? Is it about female body? We do not know. It is indicated just in this red lip and the blood, and we can get a certain kind of feeling, right? So this is the most important information that is included in the photo. And let's look at the True Blood. True Blood it seems that it really draws the inspiration from Jennifer's Body, this movie's poster, right? But there are also certain difference, right? So the first foremost important thing of the visual element is still the tongue and the mouth and the blood. But let's look at the words, the text that is included in this poster. Because True Blood, it is not a movie, it is not in theater, it is actually depend on the media platform, right? It is a TV series. So there are different choices, different kind of logos used in this particular photo. So True Blood, using two colors as a kind of contrast to show that, okay, the show's name is True Blood, most important thing, right? And then the second large size of this particular poster of the test is September 7th, 9 p.m. I look at Megan Fox, Jennifer's Body. There is just one coming soon. So of course, the premiering of the particular TV show is important. They want their audience to remember, okay, September 7th, the show is to be officially on air. And then it is called a new series from the creator of 6 Feet Under. So that is similar from to Jennifer's Body, right? Who are the creator? Who are the creating team, right? They created 6 Feet Under, is successful, and the whole team is dedicated to creating another successful TV show called True Blood. And then what is lacking in what is not chosen in Jennifer's Body's poster is that, interestingly, True Blood included a quote, and that is using a different kind of typography, a different font. Is "Thou shalt not crave thy neighbor." Very, very interesting and concise quotations to show that, okay, indicate to you, it's first to arouse your curiosity. Interesting. And then it also shows the themes of this show, right? It is about danger, it's about danger of cravings, especially when you are trespassing, right? Thou shalt not crave thy neighbors. So, looking at those posters, we can see like they are all using good logos of choosing only the most important elements, and they are not doing it in a all-encompassing way, right? They are only choosing elements, visual elements selectively. So if you are analyzing logos in a visual artifact that you are chosen for writing project 2, you can also start from, what is included on the screen, on the web page, or on the poster infographic. And next is creating visual hierarchy. This is the very important part of showing logos, is how you arrange the information so that they make sense to your audience visually, right? So most importantly, so let's define visual hierarchy. What is the definition of visual hierarchy? Is the principle of arranging elements to show their order of importance. And as an experienced and good designer, you have to practice using your logos by laying out elements logically and strategically so that you can influence the user's perception and guide them to desired actions, right? That means that your visual composition should have a visual path, and then you you can manipulate your audience using different kind of designing principles to where they set their eyes first and what to look at second and third. And the bad examples that we have shown you in the first 5 minutes, looking at this, you do not know where your eyes start from. You do not know what is the logical chain, what is the importance of all those messy tests. Looking at this, you can also see that, okay, so I don't know what is the visual path for this particular website. All right, so as I have said, logos using visual hierarchies, the designer can actually manipulate. They can control where their audiences are going to look at first. And this is kind of like interesting because, the audiences, they might from different corners of the world, and they might be different people. But because of the designing, the visual hierarchy, the designing principles, you can actually achieve the effect by ascertaining that most people are going to look at the same part, the same test first, and following the same order, interestingly. So let's look at one example here. This could be a very good example of showing you visual hierarchy by nice and smart designing, right? So let's look at this. I don't know, maybe it's a poster or maybe it's a PowerPoint slide, and where does our eyes set on first? Of course, it's you, right? Because the size of the test, and also it stand out from we'll read this first. it starts with something that is a different color, so it creates a color contrast. So of course we start from U, and then because of the size difference, we are going to read the largest font first, right? So you will read this first. And then you will read this line next, right? Our eyes then follows the instruction. And why is that? Because this is the second largest size of the, the font is very different. The size is the second largest. And then also because the color yellow stands out in contrast with we'll read this first. So that is why our eyes are going to follow a visual path from you will read this first to, and then you will read this line next. And then looking at all those background, the sizes are the same, but that's why you hear a professional stands out because of the color contrast, right? There are actually so many different ways of creating visual hierarchies, and when you're looking at your visual artifacts, you can try to see like if the designer is using all those principles to create a kind of visual hierarchy. All right, now let's look at a few examples. So, see. All right. So why does our eyes start from you will read this first, right? There are actually a few established principles that all designers need to know, right? The first thing is that size impact visibility, right? So before we can see like, the man and the whale is kind of like the similar size. So we are going to look at them together. They belong to the same visual hierarchy. But then after like a little bit change, we can see that, okay, so our eyes are going to focus more on the whale. And the diver is kind of like fading more into the background because the size is considerably smaller. So changing the sizes would actually impact the visual hierarchy you want to create. So the most important element should always be the largest one, right? If you want to create a kind of good visual path. All right. Perspectives would also change, what we are going to look at first and what kind of impression it would create, right? So for example, before we are going to look at the men working in the desk together, and then by simply changing the perspective, we can see like, okay, the man doesn't look, we're looking at the top of his head, but what is on the desk is actually more important, right? We are going to focus on the desk more than focusing on the man. All right, and color and contrast, as we have already seen in the PowerPoint slides, right? That is why the kind of designer is very smartly directing our eyes. So before, all those men are actually, all those patterned, men are actually of the same importance, right? What if we want to highlight one of them and make that one stand out so that your eyes would focus on that man more? And look at the after effect, right? By simply changing the color, making the color as a contrast to the background, sometimes we can put the most important visual element in like brighter colors, for example, in red, right, against a dark background, right? And the after effect, we can see that, of course, all the audience, their eyes are going to focus on the man in the middle. And there are also like other kind of like principles, right? Fonts, right? By changing the font and the color, we can see that we can create a visual effect. And then James Smith, we are going to, focus more the name of the applicant or this particular designer is going to stand out more, right? And other visual hierarchies, space and movement, and proximity. So there are all kinds of visual elements that could actually help you create visual hierarchy. All right. The third thing is creating visual unity through repetition. And repetition doesn't mean that we have to repeat the patterns. There are different kinds of repetitions. For example, size, shape, color, position, alignment, level of abstractions. They can all create repetitions and help you achieve a kind of visual unity. So let's look at the compare and contrast, right? So that we can see what is the logic of design, what is the role of repetition in the logos of visual artifacts. So for example, we can say like, okay, so this is a very nicely designed resume. It is professional, it's clear, it's easy to understand, versus this website design is very messy and our eyes know not where to begin. So for the resume, why is that clear and so easy to understand, and why the visual path is so clearly created? I think it is because the designer has used its reputation to create a kind of visual unity. For example, the same sized patterns all indicating, a kind of like important elements that you want to, like make a good resume, right? Different colors, similar, same size, same sized, same shape means that they belong to the same visual importance, right? And we can see like inside of the pattern, they always start from one particular visual kind of like pattern, right? And that pattern actually give you a nice summary of what is going to be talked about in the test. So for example, color palette, there is kind of like this painting logo, this small logo, and you can see like including power words, there is a feast, right? So we always start from the kind of like logo-ish kind of like design pattern, and then there are brief words to show you like the content of the principle of making good resume design. Stick to consistent color palette, highlight your contact information, so that using the repetition of the patterns, and also like the repetition of structures, visual structures, we can achieve kind of like visual unity, so that it is very clear and easy to understand versus messy and chaotic. Alright, so at the end of today's lecture, we can look at one particularly famous painting, an Impressionist painting, and see whether all those visual logos, pathos, and ethos, all those principles that we have studied in today's lecture, does it even work in real life? Actually, it does, right? So for example, does this Impressionist artist, this French artist, create a kind of visual path, visual hierarchy using the kind of design principles we have learned? Yes, of course, right? So first, we can look at the size. The size means that we are going to look at the woman that is knitting in the front first, right? And look at the size of this young woman versus the elderly woman sitting at the back. She is almost 2 sizes larger than the woman at the back, right? So that it means that when we are looking at this Impressionist painting, we are going to look at the young woman sitting in the front first. And proximity, right? She is sitting, closer to us. Of course, our eyes are going to be set on her first, right? And also looking at the color contrast. As we have already mentioned, creating a kind of visual hierarchy means that you are using different color patterns to highlight the most important thing, right? So because the woman sitting in the front in close proximity to the audience are dressing in a lighter gray versus, like the elder woman sitting in the back, they are dressed in darker kind of costumes. Our eyes are going to focus on the woman first, right? And then the color patterns, the repeated patterns of the window sills, looking at all those repeated patterns of the horizontal lines, it creates a kind of like visual unity, right? And then looking at those 4 women sitting here knitting, they are doing the same thing. They are doing this repeated action is knitting. And then the similar way they are sitting and the same thing that they are doing creates a kind of visual path and make us feel like, okay, so does that mean that this young woman, we look at her and we look at, her peers, the elderly woman, we can see like, okay, this is a woman's life summarized in one painting. In 20 years, she will become the elderly woman dressed in dark and they are still knitting, so that summarize a woman's life in 19th century France. So that creates a kind of like emotions in the audience, and it conveys, we can kind of like guess what this artist is trying to convey about this, like women's position in society in 19th century France. So that means that like understanding the visual logos and pathos and ethos are actually pretty helpful for us in our daily lives in understanding a kind of visual artifacts. All right, so this is today's lecture about visual logos, ethos, and pathos. I hope by looking at all those examples, it could give you some ideas on, if you are analyzing non-text-based artifacts, if you want to still try to talk about rhetorical appeals, about logos, ethos, and pathos, what are you going to look for and how are you going to analyze it? And I hope this lecture is useful for you.